welcome to Melis Ferry. Today we're going to be comparing two of the most popular and talked about games in recent history, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and its highly anticipated sequel, Tears of the Kingdom. To me, both games are undeniably masterpieces, but which one truly stands the test of time? Let's find out. Disclaimer, this is obviously my opinion and you're welcome to disagree. Also, spoilers for both games will be in the video, so don't watch if you haven't finished both games. So the reason I wanted to do this video was because I get this question on stream a lot. Which game do you prefer? And my answer is always, I don't know, I have to think about it. Mostly because Tears of the Kingdom feels almost too recent to have fully developed thoughts about in comparison to a game that's been out for so long like Breath of the Wild. However, it has been over a year since Tears of the Kingdom released, and I was still playing it up to a month or so ago, and I also recently replayed Breath of the Wild on the channel. So both games are fresh in my memory, and I think I've come to a conclusion. Let's do this in sections. Let's start by looking at the technical aspects. Tears of the Kingdom takes everything we loved about Breath of the Wild and cranks it up to 11. The graphics are more polished, the world feels even more alive, and the new mechanics like sky exploration, more elaborate building and crafting systems bring a whole new layer of depth to the gameplay. The initial feeling you get when you're discovering the new runes and the sage's powers and all the new ways to get around is pretty amazing. And even when replaying Breath of the Wild now, I find myself missing things like Ascend and Tulin's Gust. That doesn't necessarily take away from the mechanics in Breath of the Wild though. Tears of the Kingdom adds more complexity to the environment, and the interactions between elements are even more sophisticated. From a purely technical standpoint, Tears of the Kingdom is clearly superior. However, everything new and fresh in Tears of the Kingdom is an evolved version of something in Breath of the Wild, or inspired by it. So is the credit really to Tears of the Kingdom, or is it to Breath of the Wild for laying that foundation and making these new things possible? Debatable. Here's where things get interesting. Breath of the Wild introduced us to the freedom of Hyrule in a way that no Zelda game had before. The sense of exploration and discovery was unmatched. Every mountain peak, every forest, every ruin held the promise of something new. This was a world that didn't just invite you to explore it, it demanded it. The world felt fresh, alive, and mysterious. The first experience of stepping out onto the Great Plateau, seeing the vast expanse before you. It's a feeling that's hard to replicate. I would argue that not only is it hard to replicate, but when the replication is attempted, it falls flat. Tears of the Kingdom offers more to explore, but it doesn't quite capture the same sense of wonder and newness that Breath of the Wild did. When Breath of the Wild was released, it redefined open-world games. Its influence can be seen in countless titles that followed. The game was a bold departure from traditional Zelda formulas, embracing a non-linear structure that allowed players to tackle challenges in any order they chose. This originality is part of what makes Breath of the Wild so special. Tears of the Kingdom is a fantastic game in that aspect as well. It expands on what Breath of the Wild established, but it doesn't have the same level of impact because, like I said before, it innovates on the back of innovation. It's a sequel that's content to build on what came before, rather than break new ground. Another area where Breath of the Wild shines is in its characters and story. The game's narrative is subtle, woven into the world through memories and environmental storytelling. The relationship between Link and Zelda is complex and heartfelt, and the backstory of the champions adds emotional weight to the adventure. Tears of the Kingdom continues these stories, but the emotional impact doesn't hit as hard. The characters and plot points are well developed, but they don't carry the same sense of discovery and connection that made Breath of the Wild so memorable. While getting to know the champions and their individualities in Breath of the Wild was exciting and heartbreaking and made you want to learn more and more, the sages in Tears of the Kingdom are known characters. One could argue that because they are already somewhat established characters, it leads to deeper storytelling. But to counter that, it also takes away some of the discovery from the player's hand. Now of course, the memories in Tears of the Kingdom introduce us to new characters too, like Rauru, Sonia, Minoru, Ganondorf, and the first sages. But those stories don't necessarily connect to the present like the champion stories did, with the exception of Minoru. They're more about figuring out what's happening with Zelda than anything else. Which leads me to the one point where I do feel like Tears of the Kingdom's story has an edge over Breath of the Wild: Zelda. While Breath of the Wild develops her character quite amazingly, showing her struggles and vulnerability through the memories, in Tears of the Kingdom her storyline arguably has more weight, and her decision to become the Light Dragon and sacrifice herself for Hyrule is in my opinion the most impactful moment in the Legend of Zelda history. And in Tears of the Kingdom, Zelda is fully independent, without the pressure of her father and the frustration of her powers. So while the characters in Breath of the Wild are much more inspiring and emotionally connected to the story, can it compete with that one aspect of Tears of the Kingdom? Yes and no. Breath of the Wild doesn't have a major plot twist, although you do get a very emotional, impactful scene when Zelda awakens her powers, saving Link from a guardian. Tears of the Kingdom has the shock value. I think choosing one over the other in the aspect of the story alone comes down to very personal taste of what kind of emotional reaction you're hoping to get out of a video game. Finally, let's talk about replayability. Breath of the Wild is a game that many players find themselves returning to, even years after release. The open-ended nature of the game, combined with its vast world and countless secrets, makes it a joy to revisit. The fact that the world is so rich in detail and mystery gives it a long-term appeal that few games can match. Tears of the Kingdom offers plenty to do, but once you've experienced the new mechanics and explored the expanded world, like the depths and the Sky Islands, the pull to return isn't as strong, or at least that's how I felt. The sequel is fantastic, but Breath of the Wild feels like it has more to offer in terms of replayability and lasting impact. If I had to choose one game to replay for the rest of my life, it would be Breath of the Wild, even though Tears of the Kingdom has technically more content, more map, more everything. So to me, that ended up being the deciding factor. So which game is better? Tears of the Kingdom is a more advanced game. It's bigger, more polished, and packed with new features. It is technically a better game. But when it comes to the overall experience, Breath of the Wild still reigns supreme. Its originality, emotional depth, and the sheer magic of its world make it a game that continues to resonate with players. So being better technically doesn't mean being more enjoyable or being liked more by fans. That's always going to be a debatable thing in video games. For example, I know Elden Ring is an incredible game and better than, let's say, Pokemon Red. That's a statement that I think everyone will agree with, right? Elden Ring is a better game than Pokemon Red from a technical standpoint. But Elden Ring is not my style, doesn't appeal to me as a player, and I wouldn't enjoy playing it. And to this day, I enjoy replaying Pokemon Red. So that's kind of what it comes down to. Tears of the Kingdom is technically better than Breath of the Wild, but I prefer Breath of the Wild, because the gaming experience isn't all about technical aspects. It involves emotional connection, replayability, and a million of other factors. At the end of the day, both games are masterpieces in their own right. But for many, Breath of the Wild remains one of the most impactful Zelda experiences, one that set the bar for what open world games could be and continues to inspire and captivate players around the world. Thanks for watching this video. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments about both games and which one is your favorite. See you guys next time.